Jim and I were sleeping on the floor, and my brother was on the top bunk. And something happened that we could not explain. In the morning, we woke up, and Jim, in his sleeping bag, had somehow gotten on the other side of the bed. He woke up and he had no idea how he got there, but he said he thought it was a dream. But he woke up in the middle of the night and he said he saw someone standing over him that just had this crazy unkempt hair just standing right over him. And he said he just closed his eyes and said a prayer and went back to sleep. So, of course, we told my parents about it, but they said, well, maybe he just went underneath the bed. Sure. But as a kid, even we looked at that and said, there's no way in heck. When I was 21, my mom finally lets us know that when they bought the house, the woman who lived there, the guy who was making the arrangements, his mom, had hung herself in the closet of the room that my brother and I slept in.
From the dawn of the spoken word, storytelling has been the backbone of human culture, warning of looming dangers and evoking our most personal fears. What you're about to hear are the real-life experiences of everyday people, brave enough to share their terrifying tales. Tales where the horror hits close to home. I'm your host, Danny. Welcome to the Hometown Horrors Podcast. Listen, if you dare. Well, I gotta say, man, I'm really excited for our talk.
Sure, me too. I think it'll be a blast.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a couple questions about the show before we go specifically into your stories.
Sure, whatever. Fire away, man.
It's funny how happenstance works. We connected on Reddit, and I'm actually a pretty big fan of your show. Your listeners tend to send in their stories, and then you narrate the entire thing.
Some with heavy edits.
Yeah, I was going to ask, too. Like, do you have to edit the formatting at all just to make it coherent?
Sometimes, yeah. What frustrates me more than anything is folks who are clearly doing voice to text. And it comes out in just one giant paragraph that really needs to be 3 pages.
Yeah.
So you got to go through, and then there's misspellings, and then you're like, okay, that was autocorrect. But it's a labor of love. I don't ever complain about it. There's always outtakes. I don't save a lot of them anymore. But, once in a while, I'll throw them in at the end. If there's one that's just like a total nightmare to read, I'll leave some of those in. And there's, I try to keep the F-bombs to a minimum. But a lot of times the outtakes are, what the hell does that mean? Like, I actually literally have to stop and go, what were you trying to say here? That doesn't make any sense.
Scary Uncle Josh note. What is this gobbledygook?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, oh, what the heck are you? Okay, sure. Or I'll just leave stuff out. I'll be like, I have no idea where you were going with that. Stuff that I find and get permission to read. For grammatical purposes, I'll change. Or, if the tense is jumping all over the place. For the most part, I try not to because it's not mine. People who send stuff in and say, hey, just clean it up, do whatever you got to do. That's just part of the process, and it's not something that I shy away from.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're understanding, that's good. And I think even a small portion of your audience may be doing like a translation from another language.
A lot of times, yeah.
Because the most recent episode, I don't mean to interrupt, there was a submitter from Sweden. And it's like, wow, this is really like a global phenomenon.
Yeah, when you said the gobbledygook and translated, I got one from, God, this is years ago. He was either from Norway or Sweden or Finland or something like that. And it was I think it was a 17-minute story. And a lot of the translation was tough, but he was super cool. He was a really good guy. And when I used to do a lot more of the live campfire stuff, he would always be on. Because, for them, it was, almost the break of dawn. That was a tough one. But again, it's like, hey, you took the time to send this to me. So I've got to respect the hell out of that.
While we're still kind of on the topic of our shows in general, I want to ask, what got you into horror specifically?
So, gosh, I couldn't tell you exactly what it was. But, growing up in a house that was a little screwed up leads you in that direction organically. But always just, had a fascination with, I was a huge Godzilla fan as a kid, still am. The new Godzilla.
You saw
Kong,
-1?
Yeah, and it was amazing. The only one I didn't get to see where they did it in black and white here.
Yeah, that's the one I actually saw in theaters.
Oh,
and
God,
it was so good.
Jealous. Oh, man, I wanted to see the black and white. But I'm like, well, it'll be on Netflix or something down the line. but terrific. I hope to God it wins the Academy Award for not necessarily cinematography, but it's up for something, or it will be. But great story. There wasn't much to walk away from saying, I wish they would have done it this way. With the reboot of Godzilla, gosh, that was 10 years ago. There was small things that I was like, maybe they could have done this. Or the other ones after that, I kind of had more issues with. I was like, well, this is getting kind of cheese.
Yeah, the American ones, right? Speaking of...
yeah, exactly. Shin was terrific.
I loved Shin Godzilla. Different. It was so good. The dude that made Neon Genesis Evangelion took the reins on that one, and you could really tell.
Yeah, it really captured this is a tormented creature. This is not, it just, you can feel pain.
The moment it got out of the ocean, it was pushing blood out of its gills. Like, this is not something it was like, that's trying to attack. This is a scared animal that doesn't know how to stop its pain.
Exactly. And it was just a totally, I didn't like the googly eyes. They could have fixed that.
Oh, I love those. I thought it was so creepy because that was when it was aquatic creature, rather. Right. Those are fish eyes, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it all worked. This new Godzilla Kong, I probably will see it, but I don't know if it's going to be on my list to go to the theaters, even though it's the kind of that throwback to the cheesy 60s Godzillas, so it'll probably be fun, but it's certainly not going to be -1. There's no way.
No. Japanese cinema is doing something very different with Godzilla, whereas the American version is just Monday Night Raw with monsters, which is great. Yeah. Like, I loved King of the Monsters. I thought the Kong movie kind of didn't do anything, but
getting back to your original question, yikes, I can ramble. Former radio guy, it's just one of those things. I was always into ghosts and Bigfoot and all the crazy stuff. And of course, the movies. I remember I saw The Thing, and I probably was, that came out in 81, roughly, whatever, early 80s. So I was probably 8 or 9. And my parents were not thrilled. I always like movies like that, not necessarily the slashers, which, I've got my favorites, but I'm not really big into like things like Saw or Hostel, where it's just violence to be violent and gore to be gore. I was always drawn to the more psychological edge of horror and fear and suspense. So, like The Thing obviously is laden with grotesque monsters and stuff, but there's always that, that who is the thing? I mean, that was really what got my attention with that kind of thing.
That is my favorite horror movie. And you can tell that like a horror movie is well done for one of two reasons. One is that even if you know what's going to happen, you still get scared by it, then it's effective horror. And the other one is that even on rewatches, it feels like it could go any direction at any time.
And you're still trying to figure out
at what point, ending, which,
right. And at the ending, and I know that there's all the theories that it's child, but you still don't know. So I was into all that stuff. And meanwhile, I'm living in this house that's got weird things happening. And I'll be upfront with you, I was a sportscaster for a number of years here in town. I changed careers. And I said, if I go back, I don't want to talk about sports. I want a paranormal show. And the PD was like, oh my God, yeah, I'd fire this up. Station owner said, yeah, do it. So I started doing a 3-hour interview call-in show on a local radio station here. And then I moved that to internet radio when that had run its course. And then I can't remember what year it was where my father passed away. And I was just like, it's getting really hard to carve out 3 hours, then down to 2 every Sunday night, having to chase people around to get really good guests, which I never had a problem with booking guests, and I've had some unbelievably prominent people in and around the world of the paranormal, which I'm very proud of. But then I just said, I heard some narrators and I liked it. And I thought, I could do that too. And then I just started doing it. And kind of in the comment that I gave to you was people get really discouraged if they don't have this massive success right away. They're putting out videos and, I've only got 100 people paying attention. I look at that and go, that's 100 people more than a lot of other people get.
Yeah.
So don't get discouraged. Don't get frustrated. Don't look at it like, I only have 20,000 subscribers. It's like 20,000 people. You got to remember that. That's
20,000 people. And I've read the comments. People love the show. They're excited every time an episode comes out.
Right. And that's the juice. And you're like, okay, am I Let's Read or B-Busta? No, those guys do this full time. I would love to be able to do this full time. But I have a day job. I try to do it as much as I can. So that's how Uncle Josh has started. It's just the love of all things creepy and going back to not just the I thought I saw Bigfoot, or there's a ghost in the house. It's a lot of the stuff that's regular everyday life. I know this last episode, a guy sent me a story about some wackos trying to take his baby at the store. I see that and I'm like, Jesus, that's real. Outside of whether you believe in ghosts, the paranormal, or Bigfoot or whatever, river monsters,
Just the
that
reality of that existing in the world is
100
horrifying.
exactly. My favorite thriller suspense horror film is probably Manhunter, Michael Mann's version of Red Dragon that came out in the
Oh,
mid 80s. And Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter. By far my favorite Lecter. And I know Anthony Hopkins with his theatrics, and I certainly can't look down my nose at, Silence of the Lambs because it's an unbelievably good movie. But Brian Cox played Lecter in a way that could have been a guy who lived up my street. And that's why it was so effective for me, because it wasn't this, I'm going to eat your face or I'm going to eat your brains. It's all implied that he does these things, but it's the mannerisms that he had that you're like, this is what a psychopath is really like. He doesn't have to be a Jeffrey Dahmer. He doesn't have to be, the Ted Bundy or, all these over the top serial killers that we have out there. This could be a guy that you would never think is doing this stuff in his basement or wherever.
yeah.
And that's why I think I'm drawn to the real horrors of life, which is a creepy thing because we have enough crazy shit happening in the world, pardon my French. That's just where I'm fascinated, that there are people out there doing these strange things. And God forbid it happens to anybody that I know.
I like that you pointed out that Brian Cox's portrayal is more down to earth, because there's an inaccessibility to Anthony Hopkins and Mad Mikkelsen's. That guy can only exist in that form. You have to be in certain places for Hannibal Lecter to get you, but the idea that he could be a neighbor is something else. I definitely need to check that out.
You know where I got the tagline for Uncle Josh was not a horror movie, but it's Charlie Sheen's first movie. It's a movie called The Boys Next Door. It's about two teenage kids who go to Los Angeles when they graduate before they get jobs and just kind of fall into the real world, and they go on a spree of violence and craziness. It's a Penelope Spheris movie, and it opens up with her talking to serial killers. There are interviews with these real life wackos. And one of the guys says that at the end, he's like, these aren't zoo exhibits or whatever. It could be anybody. It could be your uncle. It could be your neighbor. It could be the guy next door. And that's why I took a little bit of creative liberty and lifted that, because that line always struck with me, that these stories that I'm narrating, is it a monster? Is it a ghost? Or is it the guy next door that you need to be worried about?
Yeah. And that's something that's so brilliant about horror. It doesn't need to be like the movie Smile where there's a demon. It could be you don't know what your neighbor's doing, and there's like a persistent bump on their side of the apartment every single night. And it might be something you don't want to know about.
100%. And the other side of it too is, especially as a kid, there's always that weird house in the neighborhood, the one that's haunted, or the weird person who lives there. It usually turns out there's nothing weird about it. It's just some old guy that nobody understands, or maybe has some mental illness, or is battling some other kind of thing, but it's still that essence of fear of the unknown. That was the name of my radio show, was The Edge of the Unknown, because that's where all that stuff lives. That's where all these stories that I narrate live. It's in that fear of the unknown. It's that fear of, did I lock the door? Is my kid really hearing voices at night? It's all of that. And again, like I said, growing up in a house, which we can talk about at some point here, and some other fun stuff that I'll throw into. When I was doing the radio show, and this, I will preface this by this, I am a skeptic believer. So I believe that weird things happen. I believe there are things that happen that we don't understand or can't explain. But that doesn't mean we need to go right to the demonic. It doesn't mean we need to go right to haunted or ghosts or those sorts of things. Because I think a lot of things that people experience, there's a lot of times very straightforward answers to what they're experiencing. But I think some people get wrapped up in the desire for it to be
Something more than it is. Yeah.
something more than what it really is. Yeah. So, on my show, I had lots of skeptics on. I'm really good friends with the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer. And talking with them and their experience with investigations and stuff has really given me a different approach to a lot of that stuff. So I will say anything that I tell you tonight, for all I know, had a decent explanation, but there were always circumstances around all of it that kind of leaves the door open to, was there a rational explanation or was there something else afoot? Whether you want to believe it's string theory or interdimensions crossing into one another. I don't know. I mean, I'm always open to everything because I can't explain what it is, but I'm certainly not going to draw a conclusion and try to prove to everybody that my house was haunted. You know what I'm saying?
And I think that takes a lot of the fun out of it too. I've been thinking about if whenever the show ends and I put out the last episode, whether it's episode 100 or episode 7,000, I might just like troll everybody and try to explain rationally the phenomena. And it's like, there's no fun in that. There may be a rational explanation for most of the things. There might not, but it's each person's individual experience.
And I think where a lot of people get frustrated with skeptics is they see those folks as taking away that fun. But I think that a lot of them get a bad rap. Now, there are the pain in the butt skeptics who will pass judgment on everything without ever doing anything on their own. They'll look at a case, perhaps not explore it, make one phone call and determine, well, that never happened to them, so therefore all those other stories are bunk.
Yeah. But it only needs to be real once.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them will say they have experienced some things that they can't explain. But again, they won't jump to a conclusion. They'll just say, yeah, I don't know why that happened.
Yeah.
And that's an okay place to be as well. So I grew up in a third-tier suburb of Buffalo, New York. So maybe 12 to 15 miles outside of the city of Buffalo. The village that I live in now is its own entity with its own school district, but it's actually still within the village, within the town, rather, of where I grew up. So I'm still geographically probably 3 miles from the house that I grew up in. My parents moved into this house when I was 3 years old on a handshake deal. It was a friend of the family whose mother passed away. And, I was 3 years old. So I have very vague recollections of any of that stuff. My earliest recollection of that house is probably the blizzard of 77 that happened up here. And that really just being, a lot of snow and wind and the general craziness that a blizzard could bring.
Yeah.
But it was a 3-bedroom house. Unfinished basement. Part of it was finished. Half of it, I guess, would say was finished where we had our stereo. My brother was 3 years older than me. We had our Kiss records and our AC/DC and Van Halen and all that going on down there with all our toys and stuff. And, just a regular suburban neighborhood, a quiet neighborhood, a P-shaped dead-end kind of neighborhood. Not a lot of through traffic, plenty of street hockey. We had a creek at the end of the street that ran right through, so lots of ice hockey in the winter. And a very large park a quarter of a mile from my house. So very idyllic, just a great place to live. It's, part of the reason that I still live in this area.
It sounds very cozy.
Super cozy and
very
just
quaint.
Very friendly. All the neighbors knew everyone. No one locked their doors. When I would go to my friend's house, you'd either knock on the door or ring the doorbell and just go in. To an extent, a good mix of blue collar, white collar, and this funny house that we moved into. When I was a kid, my brother and I shared a bedroom, and paint the picture of the upstairs. The hallway came from our living room, and some of the stories I'll describe those rooms as well. All of the rooms were in a cluster at the end of the hallway. My parents' bedroom was at the very end. Right next to them was the room that my brother and I shared, and a spare room that I would eventually move into when I got older. But when we were kids, we would hear noises at night. Some of them, I'm sure it's house settling. The house was built in 1922, but a solid house. And some of it, I can look back and say, well, it was probably this or it was probably that. But the older that we got, we did notice that we would hear footsteps at night. And, my father worked in a manufacturing facility. Back then, as a younger guy, he was moved around from first shift, second shift, and then third shift for a while. But then he got in the rhythm of being first shift. And the sounds that we thought maybe at first was dad coming home or dad going to work, they kept up. And we would hear footsteps coming up the stairs, coming down the hallway, and stopping at the cluster of 3 bedrooms at the end of the hallway. And I remember asking my parents about it and saying, you guys hear these things? And they would say no, or, if they asked me about it, they would listen. And they would say one of two things. One is it's your imagination. And 2, it's your imagination based off of your love of all things scary. You're coming home from the library with 17 books about ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot. Maybe your imagination is running away with you.
Yeah, the calls coming from inside the house.
That kind of stuff. And I do have a fun story about calls coming from inside the house as well. But as we got older, more and more things started to happen. And I think that a lot of that was just our perception was growing. It wasn't terribly frightening, but it was odd. And what I started to notice was it wasn't just my brother and I hearing things, it was our friends who would come over and stay overnight. And things would progress. All of a sudden it stopped being just footsteps. Strange noises during the day would happen. Things would get moved around in the house. And again, looking at it, trying to have a rational explanation, it was, oh, somebody just happened to move that. But there was always this progression. Things just started to grow and grow and grow. And I think when I first became not concerned, but even more into it, one of my closest friends was from a very religious family, 2 houses down. He would spend the night a lot, and strange things started to happen to him as well. Now, his parents had a completely different explanation for this sort of thing. His mother was very, very into the Presbyterian Church, and the word spiritual warfare came up. That's the first time I'd ever heard it, probably when I was about 10. But Jim was staying over one night, and we had bunk beds in the middle of our room. So there was room on either side of the bunk beds. And Jim and I were sleeping on the floor just so we could stay up late and talk and, fool around or whatever. And my brother was on the top bunk. And I remember this night because something happened that we could not explain. So if you're looking at the room, in the middle of it, there's bunk beds. I was directly on the foot of the bed with my head pointed towards the door to the hallway. Jim was on the length of the bed with his head also up by mine right at the door. In the morning, we woke up and Jim, in his sleeping bag, had somehow gotten on the other side of the bed. He woke up and he had no idea how he got there. And again, did he sleepwalk? I don't know. But he said that he thought it was a dream, but he woke up in the middle of the night, or the early morning as it were, and he said he saw someone standing over him that just had this crazy hair, this stringy, crazy, unkempt hair just standing right over him on that side of the bed. And, being a religious person that he was, I think he said he just closed his eyes and said a prayer and went back to sleep. So, of course, we told my parents about it. And we thought maybe my dad came in, but my dad did not have long hair. He was ex-military, always kept short hair. And my mother said that she hadn't come in. So there was no real explanation, but they said, well, maybe he just went underneath the bed. Sure. But as a kid, even we looked at that and said, there's no way in heck. I think it was parents rationalizing something strange or a weird story so as not to get kids riled up and get them even more scared. But about a year later, Jim was staying over again. Now, this is early 80s. And for some reason, we decided to sleep out on the front porch. Why? I don't know. Kids do stupid things, right? And my brother was in his pup tent in the backyard with Jim's older brother. And a storm came through and was just this crazy thunderstorm. And my mom came down and got us off the porch to get us out of the rain. Matt and his older brother came in to sleep in the basement because the tent was being pelted with rocks, which we immediately said, neighborhood kids, just, hey, somebody's sleeping out in the tent. Let's whip rocks at them. But when we asked around, no one was out at that time of night, so on and so forth. We had 2 corresponding experiences this night. We're in my living room, and at one end of the living room, we had bookcases surrounding a fireplace, and then the rest of the room playing out with the stairs that went upstairs. I woke up in the middle of the night after this storm, and everybody had settled, and was facing the fireplace and looking into the glass and the reflection of the room behind me in the dark. And what I believed was, at first, my mom, but it was a glowing shape. It looked like a human being that was not, bright light like a floodlight, but just this shape that was bright enough that I could see it in the reflection of this fireplace glass. And it looked like it was falling forward and catching itself and falling forward. And I remember being terrified and so afraid that I was not going to roll over and I couldn't wake up Jim. And again, one of those just, what am I going to do? I'm going to close my eyes. And I went back to sleep. Later in the night, Jim woke up. My brother had a trumpet, and he heard someone playing notes on the trumpet like it had been pressed to the floor and the ceiling where we were. And when we woke up, we were looking at each other and like, did you see that last night? No, but did you hear this last night? And I said, no. So immediately we ran up to my room where this trumpet was, and hearkening back to that things moving around on their own. My brother's trumpet that he always kept in the closet was not in its case. The case was there in the closet, opened, but the trumpet was standing up on the floor in the middle of our bedroom. Matt and his older brother were still in the basement at this time. And then I told him about this weird shape that I saw. And of course, now we're really kind of freaked out as kids. I don't remember telling our parents about it because at that point, anything that we said, they would say it's your imagination. So things again would progress. And we had a place south of Buffalo for the summer where we had, it was at a campground, and we had a trailer that we had inherited from my mom's mother. When her grandfather passed away, they would spend time in the south and then come up and stay up at Chautauqua Lake in their summers. We inherited that. It had a boat and would go there every weekend and a couple of weeks in the summer. We were getting ready to head down there, and we were building a new deck for a tent. My brother and I didn't want to sleep in this big trailer that we had, but we're guys and we want to be off doing our own things. We were going to build a platform to put a tent on for the entire summer so we wouldn't have to pitch it and strike it. And my father could not find his circular saw. My dad had a pretty short temper. He was not a violent man. He didn't beat us up or anything like that. But when he got pissed, you knew he was mad. And he was running around the house trying to find the circular saw because we obviously needed it to build this deck. And it's Friday. He's worked all week. He's working 12, 13 hours a day. He just wants to get there, and he is hotter than hell. Can't find this. Now he's yelling at us because he thinks that my brother or I took it and did something with it.
I have a very similar father where he'll constantly lose things that only he would ever be touching. And then they end up not lost 3 or 4 days later.
Exactly. Well, it's funny that you say that. So he went down to my friend Jim's house, borrowed their saw. We got in the car, we went and did our thing. When we came home that Sunday night, my father's circular saw was sitting in the middle of our living room. Now, again, looking back, did he pick it up and set it down? Really cheesy, finding a way to explain why this happened.
To be in such an obvious place, like...
How would he not have seen it? How would none of us have seen it after we'd been dispatched to look in the strangest places? Maybe I put it under the record player. Yeah, Dad, that's where it is. So, but I remember he didn't say a word. He picked it up, went down to his shop, and came back upstairs, and that was the end of it. A little while later, now I was in 5th grade, so that probably was 4th grade when that happened. In 5th grade, I had a friend of mine that we got into tons of trouble together. We were the two guys that hated each other but couldn't live without each other, that had to be separated in class because if we were together, we were getting into stuff.
The gruesome twosome.
The gruesome twosome. And this was the first time I had no idea what would come to be known as an EVP. My yearnings for being a broadcaster were really evident from an early age. I had a tape recorder and I would get my stuffed animals and I would do newscasts with sports and make my own radio show. But I had a habit of also talking in kind of like a diary on tape. Actually, I still have one of those tapes. Actually, I have 2. Oh, my God, now it's 40 years ago. Holy God, I'm old.
Wow.
And I haven't listened to them in years. I'm sure whatever is on there is most embarrassing things I've ever heard because I'm sure I'm talking about some girl that I liked or whatever. Anyway, so my friend Keith is over, and no one is home. My parents and brother are visiting my grandmother, who gave us the trailer, by the way, at her apartment. So it was just Keith and I. We're outside and, smoking cigarettes or whatever it is that we were doing in 5th grade, trying to be tough guys. We came in and we were talking on my tape recorder on a tape. And he kept saying, "Hey, I think your parents are home." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I can hear your mom. She just called you." And I was like, whatever. So I got up and went downstairs and nobody was home. And I came back, I said, "Nobody's here, man. I don't know what you're hearing. Maybe it's, who knows? You heard something outside." And we kept talking. And he said, "There it is again. Your mom's home. It's got to be her. Maybe the car is not in the driveway or whatever." We go downstairs and nobody's there. So we're starting to get a little freaked out. And I'm talking, and then I heard it. And we both looked at each other and were like, okay, this is messed up. We heard it clear as day. It was a high-pitched female voice saying my name. So we're talking about it. Now you can tell in the tape, I wish I still had the tape. I couldn't tell you what happened to it. We're highly agitated. And I'm telling the story of what we're experiencing. Keith has heard this. I haven't heard it. I just heard it. And my parents aren't even here. They're at the Brothers of Mercy apartments. And right when I said that, on the tape, in the background, you could hear a high-pitched woman's voice saying my name.
Oof.
And then it was bedlam. Now we're home alone. We go back outside. We didn't care it was raining. We're like, we're not going back in there until people get home. And not long later, my brother came home with my parents, and we went back up to the tape recorder and played it back. And there it was, clear as day. Everybody heard it. And we played it for my parents, and they didn't say anything like they normally would. They just, thought maybe a car siren or police siren, whatever. Yeah, police in our neighborhood. The only time they were in our neighborhood was when we were causing trouble. So we're freaking out. I remember taking it to school and playing it for people. And of course, everybody knew that I was into all this weird stuff. And, I was the Ghostbuster and blah, blah, blah.
In everybody's minds, there's a sane explanation, but...
100%, yeah, exactly. and again, it's just compiling and compiling. And I had another friend in the neighborhood who would not stay over. He would get to about 12:30 every time that he was going to stay overnight, and he would just get freaked out and leave. I'm still friends with him today. I've never really talked to him about it. So I'm starting to see a pattern. I'm like, okay, so Jim has seen stuff and Keith has seen stuff. My brother's hearing things and seeing things, and I'm seeing and hearing things. This can't just be nothing. It's too many people to have a conspiracy, right? Well, one of them is going to tell the truth sooner or later. And a guy who's now still my best friend, we really formed a strong relationship around that time. He experienced stuff as well. He would stay overnight. And by now, I'm no longer in the room that I was sharing with my brother. I had my own room across the hall. The footsteps, strangely enough, stopped the minute that I moved into my own room. We never heard the footsteps ever again. One night, Kevin and I were slept over. And by now, I had upgraded. I still had my tape recorder, but I had a dual cassette deck boombox. This is 1986, and oh boy, super cool guy with the
cutting
technology
edge tech,
over
yeah.
here. Oh yeah, right now I can just dub tapes and I don't have to pay for any of them anymore. And one night we couldn't go to sleep because my tape player, one of the decks kept playing. We would stop it and it would turn itself back on, and it just kept doing this over and over until I finally unplugged it, and we're finally getting some silence, and it's probably 3 a.m, and damned if the thing didn't keep doing it. And, of course, did I leave batteries in it? Nope. And I just picked it up, put it in the closet, shut the door, and I said, whatever. He's freaked out. I'm kind of excited because it's kind of justification that I'm not making any of this stuff up. So a couple of years later, we move out. And we move right up the street to another house that my parents had always loved, that I always loved. And nothing ever really happened there. We had some incidents with the laundry stopping where we would put loads of laundry in and the lid would be up. Again, we can write that off as somebody just forgot to put the lid down. But it happened with such frequency. It was like, there's no way that this would keep happening. Nobody is going to keep forgetting to put the lid down. And it happened to everybody in our family. And that was that. I got through high school without any really strange things happening in this new house. We knew the people who had bought our house. They never complained about anything. They never said anything.
Yeah.
The last time I saw Lucy was in 2006. I happened to just be cruising through the neighborhood and stopped to talk to her. She had redone the house. I did walk through it. It was really kind of surreal to have not been in that house for over a decade and just remembering all the strange things that had happened there. And I asked her, I said, did you ever have any weird things happen here? And she was like, no, not that I can think of. Here comes the payoff. When I was 21, we were all chatting about the weird things that happened there. And I said, I can't believe I was talking to my parents. I said, I can't believe you never experienced any of these things. Well, my mom finally lets us know that when they bought the house, the woman who lived there, the guy who was making the arrangements, his mom, had hung herself in the closet of the room that my brother and I slept in. And like, you could have told us this 12 years ago, and it probably would have made a hell of a lot more sense, and maybe we wouldn't have been as freaked out as we were because we didn't have any explanations for all this stuff. But that was just like this hammer that fell, and we're like, okay, well, maybe there is some connection to my friend Jim, who sees something standing over him with this crazy hair. Maybe this is an explanation for I saw an apparition of something in my living room falling forward. Maybe it was a reenactment of her hanging herself. And again, I can't say for sure, but at least there was a little more meat on the bones of this skeleton, terrible pun.
Because it explains so many things in retrospect.
It was something trying to get our attention, obviously. And they were clearly happening to people who were going to pay attention to it rather than grown adults who maybe wouldn't think twice of it or are also of the era that they don't want to scare their kids.
Yeah, I
But
think
to
your
this day,
mom might have made the right decision there, especially living in the room where it happened. Can you imagine what that would do to, you said you were 11, I guess your brother's
3 years older than
3
me.
years
So
older.
exactly. When I'm 21, I say, hey, you should have told us. Now, as an adult with with a small child, I'm like, there's no way in hell she should have told us that. You've got a serious point there. So that kind of, put the conclusion on that house. But I did mention earlier something about the calls coming from the inside of the house. And I've told all these stories, I believe, on my channel. And I think I had a contest where I told the story, didn't say who the story came from. And if you could guess which story was mine, I think I gave away a gift card or something like that. So every once in a while, I'll remember something and I'll share it on the channel. And I remember it wasn't too long ago that I shared this one. It was around Christmas time when I was probably in fourth grade. We were the family that always went out to get the tree, the Griswold kind of thing, where we would go out and cut one down. A lot of times we would cross country ski or snowshoe to get it. So it was really an all day event. Right when we got home, a cop car pulled up to our house. My dad obviously is like, what can we help you with? And he said, is everything okay here? And my father's like, yeah, why would there be an issue? The officer said, well, someone has been calling 911 from your house. And again, this is before, we didn't even have an answering machine back then. And they were routinely coming to check. And obviously no one was there. We're all out getting this tree. So my father continues to talk to him. In the 3 hours and change that we were gone, someone had called 911 from our home phone 13 or 14 times.
Oh my God.
And every time there was no sound and, it was a hang up. So obviously the police are kind of concerned. And they said, do you mind if we walk through? And he was a really nice guy. And we're like, yeah, we have no explanation. And to this day, we cannot explain why that happened. And then I look back and say, okay, funny way that phones work. Who knows? 1 or 2 times, okay. But that many times, you start to ask questions like, how the hell is this possible? And that is cause for alarm. Like, what is happening here? But again, something that just came and went. Everybody was safe and it never happened again. But just another odd occurrence that my parents couldn't say didn't happen. And I didn't experience, things like that for many, many years. But some odd things did happen at other places that I lived. And those involved my bride of coming up on 20 years. Situations that really freaked her out. And she would always blame me that it was things following me around. But if, you want me to get into that as well, I would love to, just keep bending your ear and tell you about these other strange things that have happened to me wherever I've gone.
I'd love to hear more about it. I just want to ask some questions about the childhood home before we move on.
Sure,
real quick.
please. Absolutely.
So first off, I have to say I really envy the resolve that your mom or maybe both parents had in just not feeding into the fact that they were living in a house that could have very well been haunted. I don't know if it's just the mentality of parents or maybe even just parents in that time and age, but if I put both of my children in a room where the previous owner's mother had hung herself, I would take the stories of hearing footsteps or just strange little electronic phenomena and be like, oh my God, something is definitely happening here. And for them to just wave the hand and be like, who knows what it really is? Or even to just have the resolve to go, we got to do what we got to do. We can't just buy another place. We got to live it out.
We got to ride it out. We got to ride it out. And again, there's so many theories about all this stuff about energy around kids and the talk of poltergeist phenomenon usually happening around kids going through puberty, whether it's a boy or a girl and those sorts of things. That's something else that I've always considered. Did we cause these things to happen? Was there some attraction to us and this energy and all of the things that families go through, the good times, the bad times, and all that kind of stuff, for them to keep to their ages, to not ever say that, hey, we experienced that? Maybe they never did. And if they did and they never wanted to say it or face that, that seems a little odd. My mom is in her 70s, so it's like, why would that be taboo anymore? Or I've also had in my mind, with some of the tumult that happened in my family in those years, it could have been, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Or I don't want to, go back to a period of time where, maybe there was a stretch where things weren't as awesome as I thought they were as a kid. I have no idea. Like I said, my dad was an unbelievably hard worker. He was a UAW guy. and worked insane hours to get the stuff that he wanted to get to his kids. And, that's got to also be hard when you've got two working parents who both have jobs that are very demanding and, just being tired. We've got a summer place, we've got a boat, we've got all these responsibilities, and, blah, 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 blah. It could have been just manifestation in their minds that if they did experience anything, I can't put words in their mouth or experiences in their heads. That's one explanation I've had, that it might have just been a portion of time where they just didn't really want to deal with any more BS than they were already dealing with, right? Now I've got a kid who thinks he's here seeing ghosts. Yeah, throw that on the fire. That'll keep things rolling smooth. So, but yeah, like I said, other than the small things that my mom, remembers or talked about, never had a discussion about it.
That's wild. And I think that's also just the mentality of people of that age. You have to white knuckle your way through a lot of life. So any little distraction, you're just trying to push your way through. Like you don't have 100%. The bandwidth to worry about what might be fictional skepticism.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like what I talked about, why I love stories of, these really strange occurrences that happen with goofballs in real life or on a weird camping trip and there's wackos out there.
In the woods.
Yeah. Right. If you've got that to worry about and whatever level, why do I need to add any more angst or craziness into a life that has already got some weird stuff happening? You're right. Why add fuel to a fire? That's a totally rational way to look at it.
It's funny. I had another horror radio host on. His name's Hart D. Fisher. Really good dude. Had a lot of good stories. And what's striking is some of the similarities to yours, not in that the stories are similar, but the happenings are similar. He would lose something, like say his car keys, and he and a friend would look all over the house to try and find them. And then there they would be right in the middle of the floor where they had both been walking or would easily have seen that. And then you'd have a story of he and his wife were living in a house and they would hear their names being called by seemingly the other person, but it wouldn't be them. And sometimes it would happen when they were both in the same room together. They would hear one of them called from another room, and it's like there can't possibly be anybody there.
Sure. You look for these explanations of what was that, or is my mind playing tricks on me, or is there really this disembodied voice calling your attention for one reason or another? In that case, again, I can't speculate on what he was going through, but in some way, shape, or form, is it an energy that's inside of us? Or energy is such a stupid word to use,
but accurate.
It's energy. Yeah, but it is, right? Because I don't have any other word to use for it. Maybe I needed something to be calling to my attention something. That's why I might have heard the voice. Or maybe something was going on with his bride or whatever that he needed to be paying attention to, but wasn't, and vice versa. I don't know. The world is a pretty fantastic place all in its own without other stuff that we can't explain happening. But when you put those little pieces of the unexplained, it's a pretty interesting tapestry and a pretty interesting place, this little island Earth that we live on.
Yeah. And the callback to the thing is just you don't have full context. That is where so much of horror comes from. It's just not seeing the entire picture and the fact that you may never know the entirety of why or what happened. You may never get the definitive answer. That's what makes it scary.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's the thing in the closet. It's the monster under the bed. All of those things that horror really builds upon. Those primal fears that we all have at one point or another, whether it's in your own home or you're out in the middle of nowhere by yourself. One thing that I've always said to people, this came up in earnest because right around, it must have been 99 when the Blair Witch came out. Movie, I love the movie. It's just such a fun movie.
It's really fun, yeah.
The Sixth Sense came out at the same time. Funny sidebar, I went to see The Sixth Sense, and to this day, I've never lived this down. For whatever reason, some of those movies, especially M. Night Shyamalan, Rattling a Ding Dong, for whatever reason, I can figure out his movies within 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, wait a second. I remember being in the theater with my friend, and we're watching Sixth Sense, and everything's going along. And I out loud, and I didn't mean to, said, oh, wait a minute, he's dead. Just the groans, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get my ass kicked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm dead. And I was so embarrassed. But I worked with a woman. She worked in a different radio station than the one I was in down the hall. And she kept saying how scary The Sixth Sense was. And I was like, all right. And I said, the Blair Witch, to me, is much scarier. And she said, well, I don't think that that's scary at all. And I asked her, and this is where I'm going with this, and I say this to people, if you've never been truly in the woods, and I don't mean at a park near your house. I'm talking 25 miles from the nearest town in the dead of night by yourself or even a small group, you don't realize how scary that prospect really is when you don't know what else is out there, be it coyotes or, up in the Great White North, not far from me. One of my favorite places is a provincial park 2 hours north of Toronto, where there's timber wolves and there's moose and there's all these things out there. And those are just the things that we understand. God knows how far from anything could go wrong. That to me is a hell of a lot scarier than anything that I could see in a theater like The Sixth Sense or something like that. And I was laughing at this lady and I'm like, you've never been out in the woods by yourself, have you? And she actually admitted, she's a wonderful lady. And Lisa looked at me, she's like, well, no. And I said, then that's why you don't understand why the Blair Witch is as screwed up as it is. It's the feeling of desperation. It's the feeling of we're lost.
Yeah,
And,
beyond the
that,
reasonable things to be afraid of, there might be something much, much worse.
Exactly. Now there's a crazy thing or people out there chasing you around. Okay, that now we've upped the ante a little bit. But yeah, I'll digress at that point.
And that's the beautiful thing about horror too, is that it's entirely subjective. The scariest story for someone might be that story you were telling earlier about potentially having a child kidnapped in a store. If you don't have a child, that's most of the context is out the window for you.
I transitioned from radio into the world of public relations and media relations many moons ago, and still did radio a little bit on the side. But I got hired at this agency, and one of the questions that I was asked, I've never been asked this before in an interview, what's your biggest fear? And I was maybe 30, and I was being a wise ass, and I just said flying wolves. The guy looked at me and he was like, what? And I said, flying wolves. And he was like, what are you talking about? I said, I don't know. Flying wolves is pretty scary. I mean, if you're on the ground, they can run you down. And then if you get away in a boat or someplace else, now they can fly. I said, that's pretty scary. And it was a joke, and he got it, and we laughed. And I asked my boss, did they, after I got hired, I said, did they ask you that question? And he said, yeah. And I said, what did you say? And he has kids, and that's the first thing that he said. Something happening to my kids. Now, as a dad, I have that same fear. That, something is wrong when I'm not home, or something can be here with my little one or my bride. At that age, when I didn't have kids, and half seriousness and half kidding around, flying wolves was the scariest thing I could think of. And now it's actually something that's tangible. It is that some wacko at the supermarket that might try to walk off with my child.
And that might be the significant thing in where horror transitions between childhood and adulthood. I'm in my early 30s right now. And I'm not sure I'll ever have an experience where I'm like, oh no, it's a ghost in the house. But I could see myself fearing like, my girlfriend's late coming home from work today. Is she okay? I haven't heard from my parents in a week or two. I got to get them on the horn so I know they're okay.
Well, I'm glad you paused when you said that my girlfriend is late coming home. Because the first thing that I thought of was she's late. Oh my God, we're having a child.
that is another one. Yeah.
Oh my God, you are okay. Because we've all been, well, not all of us, but some of us have been down that road.
We've got to make some plans.
Yeah, I wasn't planning for that. Oh my God, the fate worse than death, but it's not. Again, I had that closeness with horror movies and the science fiction and this desire that, oh God, can't Bigfoot be real? That's immediately where my sense of horror and fear would come from. And, doing the show, having this podcast that I've done for so long and hearing all these heartfelt stories of just the craziness, it's that wake-up call. It's that bucket of cold water that the fear isn't as far away as you think it is. It's not necessarily on a silver screen or in a really cool book. It could be anything that you're going to encounter when you walk out the door. Ghosts, besides the point, which is even terrifying in and of itself, where you're afraid to go home because there's something strange happening in your house that you can't get away from. And now you got to go back onto the street where you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people that you have no idea what they're going to do or what mood they're in. So the world can be terribly, terribly scary, but at the same time, it's a pretty cool place as well.
Yeah, and that's the fun of it. You might have sat next to somebody who has 3 bodies in their fridge on the bus.
Sure.
And it'll never affect you. It's just the randomness of life.
Yep. You never really know what's going on out there. Right before we got married, I had a very low-key bachelor party. In college, I was a party guy. I was a DJ at a bar that was always going out, into my early 20s and 30s, et cetera. But I wasn't super huge on having a bachelor party where people were going to give me money. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I just wanted my friends to hang out. I was renting a duplex in a town not far from where I am right now. And we were just going to hang out in my backyard, have a fire, play some poker, smoke cigars, drink some beers. I wheeled out a TV with my Nintendo. We had a Super Tecmo tournament and just had a total riot. Guys being guys, laughing and raising a little hell. And then everybody left, and my bride-to-be was living with me. She had been out with her girlfriends, and she came home. And we had, this is, gosh, right after we got Lance, the paranormal pup. God rest his soul. He was with me for 16 years. Just one of the best golden retrievers I've ever had. We're in my backyard. The fire's dying down. And he was just the sweetest animal. He was protective, but he was very, very sweet. Suddenly started barking back at our house. And, no one was there. It was probably 1 or 2 in the morning. And he just was bristling. His hair is starting to go up on his back. This is beyond he sees something and he's trying to get our attention. He's worked up about something. And I'm sitting there looking through the kitchen window, the extended part of the kitchen where I had a dining room table and a big window there. And I remember looking at it and seeing someone that looked like an older guy walk past the window by the sink. And this is while my dog is going bananas. So, of course, the first thing I'm thinking of, did I leave the front door unlocked? Is somebody in the house? And my wife is now freaking out as well. And it took me back to being a kid, having that fear of the house that I grew up in with weird things and seeing things. And it took me a while to just get my resolve up and go in there and make sure that there wasn't a human being in my house. Thankfully, there was nobody. And that night, faucets kept turning on in our bathroom, which, of course, freaked my wife out even more. Being the dork who was into this stuff, I'm excited because I'm like, going, okay, here we go, round 2. But that was the only strange thing that happened there. But it was, again, I have to look at it. How many beers did I have? Was it a manifestation of something that I wanted to have happen? That I made myself see something? I mean, clear as day, I saw a guy. But was it that part of my brain that made it feel so real? Or maybe it was, as I said, that desire to have something strange happen again. And we didn't experience anything else there. But after we got married, we wanted to move a little bit closer to the school she was teaching in. And unfortunately, the company that I worked for downsized and I lost my job. And I was going back to school to work on a master's. And I didn't want her driving 40 minutes to work every day. So we found a very old house. It was built in 1888, very country setting. The guy who owned this property had built his dream house right next door. Wonderful guy. We knew the tenants that were there that were moving out. They were friends of my wife's family. And that'll come into play with the weirdness of this place. We moved in and I was home a lot because I was doing some part-time stuff in construction, but I was home a lot because I was going to school and my wife was away and I was substitute teaching and, just doing what we had to do to pay the bills. And I kept hearing noises in the house. I kept hearing kids. We didn't have kids. I just had my faithful golden retriever who would also kind of freak out a little bit in that house too. There was a little room off of the living room in the front of the house that we never used. I had all my guitars in there. It was kind of a catch-all room where if we needed space for throw something, we put it in there. And then I would go in there and play. And that was really the only time I went in there. But I would hear these kids giggling all the time. And I remember telling my wife about it. And she's immediately going to, oh my God, not again. You keep dragging this stuff around with you wherever you go. We both started to experience some other things, with things moving around, odd kinds of things. And it came to a head when my mother-in-law was having some kind of party for this woman who lived in the house previous to us moving in and her daughter. And they were all at my in-laws' house. And this young girl, a couple of years younger than us, says to my bride, have you heard the kids yet? My bride looks at her and says, what? And she says, have you heard the kids playing in the house? Now, I've never had a conversation with this woman or her daughter. And that immediately prompts my bride to call me. And she's like, oh my God, you weren't lying. But I said, no, of course I wasn't making this up. I told you I heard some strange noises. Again, it was that justification of something happening that's odd, that it wasn't just me. There was somebody else involved in this. And we had gone to Nantucket on our honeymoon. And we had this really big basket of shells and stuff that we had brought back. We were planning on a move. We had both accepted jobs in Virginia. And we were getting, things together and packing. And one morning, I woke up and I heard my bride go downstairs. And she just started swearing. She was very angry. And I said, what's going on? And I came downstairs, and the basket of shells that we had always kept on our really big dining room table was on the floor, and a lot of the shells had been smashed. And she immediately blamed my dog, her dog. I mean, it was our dog. And I said, there's no way in hell Lance got into that. He can't get up on the table that far. It was not the dog. But we didn't have an explanation. And we were sitting in the living room talking about this. Now, that front room that I just mentioned had a door off of the living room, and right next to that was the front door to the big porch of this place. And it was a big wooden door. And then there was the storm door that I had opened to let, the breeze come in. It was just a really nice way to cool the house down. And the kids came up again, these phantom children that were playing in the house. And I just kind of jokingly said, oh, maybe the kids did it. And my bride says, well, you know what, if it is, I'm sick of their shit. The minute she says this, right next to her where she's sitting on our couch, the screen door right outside of where this room is where I'm always hearing these kids slam shut. She jumps up. She says, I'm out of here. She gets in her car and goes to her parents' house. And she was serious about not coming back. For whatever happenstance, circumstance that the door decided to just slam shut on its own, I don't know, but it was perfect. And of course, I'm concerned because I don't want my bride to be scared. But at the same time, I'm like, oh my God, that was awesome. So towards the end, it was the last night in the house. We had gotten everything. I had packed up this gigantic truck with all of our stuff. We were heading out in the morning. We were going to stay at her parents' house. We were going to come back, get the truck, and then make our way down to Virginia. And that night I was going through the house, just making sure everything was cleaned and, we didn't leave anything and, just doing that last once turn. I'm by myself. And I remember having a beer, the last beer of the house kind of thing. To explain the house a little better, the house that was built in 1888 was the front. And this guy who owned the house had put a fairly large addition on the back with a newer kitchen, an upstairs loft, and another bathroom downstairs. But that front room was always odd. We would put Christmas lights up in the windows, just these little candles that we would turn on at Christmas time. And one of them would always go off. That was a portion of the house where my dog would also sit and bark and growl. And we never had an explanation why that one light would always go off. So I'm doing this last walkthrough, and I'm heading down the stairs. There's like a little bit of a landing, stairs to go downstairs in this front portion of the house. And I can't say for sure, but I had the feeling that there were two kids standing in that front room. But I didn't have this feeling of maliciousness or fear or anger. It was this feeling of, I don't want to say contentment. It's hard to explain. It was kind of like a very heartfelt goodbye.
Like, thanks for all the fun.
kind of like that. Like, we knew you were here. We didn't mean any harm. We weren't trying to scare you. It was just this very pleasant feeling, but it wasn't like a full body apparition or anything like that. I just had this sense. And, I just kind of did this wave and went downstairs and turned the lights off, locked up, got in my car. And then the next day we were out of there. We were in Virginia for a year and then moved back here. And honestly, that's the last time anything, really strange has ever happened. Oh, there was one other thing I remember. Lori would find shoes for Barbie dolls that certainly were not ours and weren't there when we first moved in, but she would find them in different places in the house. I do remember that. That was around about the time I told her about the kids giggling. But that was the last time anything like that had ever happened. And I got to be honest, as much as I'm into telling other people's stories, that's really where my interest is now. If I never have anything strange ever happen to me ever again, I will not be unhappy. I enjoy talking to people in the investigative field, folks that I've had on the radio show, The Edge of the Unknown, folks from, like I said, the staunchest of skeptics, guys like Joe Nickel and Ben Radford, who is a dear friend of the show. Ben is just a terrific guy. He's the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer. To the other staunchest of true believers, folks like Kathy Martin, whose aunt and uncle were Benning and Barney Hill. And she's a wonderful, wonderful lady. She's got lots of books if anybody wants to look her up. She's the closest living relative outside of Barney's daughter, who I believe is an MMA fighter. And, other folks from MUFON that I had on. And, so a good, healthy conversation is really what I'm interested in now. And my one claim to fame, used to be a big fan of Joe Rogan's podcast, which I still listen to. He had someone on, and the guy had mentioned Stan Friedman, the flying saucer guy. He was a nuclear physicist, that was probably the biggest expert about the Roswell crash. And Joe mentioned on a broadcast one time, he was like, you know what, I always wanted to have that guy on. And my claim to fame is Stan was on my show 3 times, man. And Stan and I, had a friendship. I would call Stan out of the blue. When he passed away, I was crushed by that because he was such an amiable guy who would come on my show for 3 hours and never had a problem. He's an hour behind, East Coast time where he lived up in Canada. I would rather talk to somebody about their experiences than have any of the other experiences, which I kind of misspoke. I have had some strange things happen at a locally purported haunted place here in town, and I've recorded some odd things in there that I've actually had analyzed by both skeptic groups and some folks at the University of Wyoming. And I've said this is probably the 3rd time I've said it. I would rather talk to somebody else about their experiences or have someone send me a story that I can put into a narrative that perhaps they weren't comfortable with, or they would rather have my voice telling it. That to me is so much more fulfilling than ever having anything happen to me ever again. If it never happens again, I will pass into the next realm a happy guy. But until then, I want to keep telling stories. I want to keep having these conversations. And I want to be talking to people like you. You and I met, by chance through Reddit. And here we are having this conversation.
And I relate to that so much. First off, I want to say that if that experience with the aforementioned children is your final, bookend supernatural experience, there's a poeticness to that. Because a lot of these stories kind of really only exist in the realm of childhood, where anything could be possible. We've been talking about it throughout the entire episode, but as you age, some of the magic kind of goes away, and I feel like we're both trying to latch on and hold some of that magic just a little bit longer.
Yeah, I have to agree. When I started doing The Edge of the Unknown, there were all these places around right here in Western New York. A good friend is a guy named Mason Winfield. Everybody should go check him out. I know he was launching his own podcast, but he's an author and a researcher. His background is in folklore, especially with the indigenous tribes in our area. He's got a number of books out. Some are fiction, and a lot of his stories he writes in a fictionalized manner, but they're based on true events. A Ghost Hunter's Journal is how I got introduced to Mason, which reminds me we were supposed to have coffee, and I think I blew him off. Oh, well. Anyway, so, being able to talk to these guys and opening up my eyes to all these really interesting places here in Western New York and other relationships that grew through that. As I mentioned, I had some strange experiences at a place called the Iron Island Museum here in a little burg outside of Buffalo called Lovejoy. If you're in the area and you want to do overnight ghost hunts, they do all that stuff. They have tours. It was originally I want to say at first it was a church. Then it was converted into a funeral home. And they've had a lot of really interesting historical things happen there. When they first bought it to turn it into the museum, they found a number of cremains that were not identified. And they were, through their due diligence, were able to find who these people were and to give them proper burial. Some of them were World War II vets. So it's not only is it a neat place with a lot of history, but, a good, solid group of people running it that have always done the right thing and are very open to anybody coming in there. They've been on, I know they were on with the Ghost Hunters, which, those shows I could take or leave. I would never have any of those guys on my show just because those shows are, to me, they're just hairspray and production and they're nonsense. But I did have Barry Klingjohn, who was on Ghost Lab. That didn't last that long. I believe that was on Discovery. He was a pretty neat guy.
Yeah, I've had a couple of paranormal investigators on myself, and no one with a huge TV show or following, but people that just wanted to get out and because I think our interests are aligned in that we just want to hear a good story at the end of the day. I don't really care whether or not ghosts are real. I just want to hear a good story.
100%. And these people are coming at it, whether they're true believers or they're truly skeptic, because they always say that. Well, we are kind of skeptical. I'm like, no, you're not. There's no shame in saying that you're not. They're TV shows. They're supposed to be that way. I don't have any ill will against those guys and gals. But again, it's the story. It's the relationship. It's having them on to talk about their experiences. That's the juice. I do a podcast for the company that I work for. And that's what I always tell everybody before we do a podcast. This is more of you, less of me, which is odd to be doing this show with you where it's more of me it's not a bad thing. I'm very, very grateful, and it's very gracious of you to have me on. But you're right. It's having that conversation and hearing somebody else's story and giving someone else a platform to tell the things that have happened to them. And that's really what Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories is about. I always say I read them all.
Yeah.
There's only one that I never read, and I've been upfront with that. And it was a story that it was pretty intense, and I actually had to apologize. And I said, look, this is one that I can't get into bigger ramifications had I done it. And it was just something that I said, if I do this, I am opening the door to a lot of stuff that I don't really need in my life. All I will say is it involves a religion that a lot of people don't consider a religion. Leah Remini has her own show about it and a podcast. So that's as far as I go with that. The last thing I need is having any of those people breathing down my neck saying, what are you doing telling a story about this? But other than that, I read them all. If it's a minute and a half, I'll read it. I will share that story. If it's, a 22-minute epic saga, there's just satisfaction in doing that.
Yeah, and I think we have the very same philosophy in that regard. The way I see my show is that it's you featuring me. I get to be a fly on the wall for this experience that you're offering me. And I'm so grateful to have that.
It's fun when you don't have an attachment to it. I guess that's really the way I look at it. When I finish a story and the post-production is done and the episode goes out, it's going to make some other people happy, and that's cool. But outside of me telling a story or something that happened to me, there is not that attachment. I don't have to be a skeptic. I don't have to be a true believer. I'm just telling someone else's story. And that's really where I want to be. That's what I've built myself up to be. And I'm happy to just do that for the rest of my days as long as this thing lasts.
I feel precisely the same way. Something that is lost in the way we're doing the interview right now is that I usually go to someone's house or place of business, wherever they can conduct the interview. And I just, I'm on call essentially. And I've had the biggest, goofiest smile on my face the entire episode. Like, this is perfect.
Awesome. Like I said, hey, coincidence? We bumped into each other. You had a story, and I was like, hey, and I always ask permission. People always say, did you ask? I'm sure there's a lot of folks who do run that risk of reading somebody else's stuff and having somebody hear about it and go ahead and tell you can do that. I think I've only had someone say no a handful of times. Maybe it's just too sensitive, too close to home. They were happy putting it on whatever forum I found it on, or if it was on Reddit or whatever. 99 times out of 100, they're like, yeah, that would be really cool if you would do that. And never had anybody come back and say, you told that completely wrong, or you missed that. And usually it is kind of like in the world of paranormal or the unexplained, you might not have had an experience, but you know somebody who has, or you find out that person who has been reluctant to talk about it. But once they do, they don't just have one story, right? Like, I don't have one story. I have the strange house, and a couple of other weird things happened. I had this other strange house, and there are repeat authors, I guess I'll use that term. There are people who send stories that they remembered, oh yeah, this other thing happened, or, I forgot about that time I was on vacation and these weirdos were following us around the market in Cairo or whatever. I like to think that the reason that they keep sending me these stories, that they might not send to the other big guys or whatever, that they trust that I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to tell their story with 100% of what I got. And, that's the result that they were looking for. And I try to stay out of the commentary too. I mean, you mentioned your Uncle Josh note. Yeah. Once in a while, I'll say, okay, clarification, or this is what I thought of, or, or add a little bit of something like that into it. But for the most part, I don't want to do that. I don't want to pass judgment. I don't want to say this guy's full of beans, because somebody could look at and listen to what I've just told you in this session and say, he's full of nonsense. None of that really happened. And that's their privilege. And I don't have any problem with that. I wasn't there. I don't know. And I think some of the skeptics that I've talked to, just because we've mentioned them before, will say the same thing. I can't say what happened to you was not what you think it is. But if I can try to recreate it or look into what maybe caused it, that's the approach that most of those guys take. Now, there are the other guys, as I mentioned, too, that are just going to write it off and say, no such thing as ghosts, so there's no sense in listening to your story. I don't like taking that approach whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it was a conversation on Facebook or something, and it was about Uri Geller, the spoon-bending guy. A lot bigger than he is now, but he's still around. His publicist reached out to me about being on my show. And, when I was on the edge of the unknown doing that. And I didn't see the email. By the time that I responded, he was already back in Israel, so he couldn't do it. And I told that story to some skeptics, and they were like, why the hell would you have that guy on? You know he's a fraud. And I said, well, that may be, but I still want to hear his story.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And then other skeptics were like, yeah, why wouldn't he want to let him tell his story? Whether it's BS or not, he has a right to tell his story and you have a right to disagree with it. But why would you just not, listen to somebody else's story? I mean, you mentioned it more than once. That's a sweet spot to actually just hear a cool story, whether it's true or not. It's fun to hear it. And on my side of it, it's fun to tell it.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier too. That's why Rogan used to be so scintillating, because you could get almost anyone on there.
Right. And I disagree with a lot of his guests, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to go down that road. But his guests are not as, in my opinion, as interesting as what he used to do. Maybe a year or two ago, he had Bob Lazar on, which was awesome. It was fun to hear Bob tell his story. When he's had, the ancient civilization was that Graham Hancock, who I don't agree with at all, but it's still interesting. Yes. And I love those kinds of guests. And some of the creepier real life things that have happened, he's talked to documentarists and that sort of thing. But you're right. The conversation is what everybody wants to hear. And it's not someone poo-pooing it. And it's also not 100%, yeah, I agree with you. But it is that art of a long-form conversation that I always look forward to with him, because it was such a wide variety of guests. And it was, people I'd never heard of. And someone once asked me, doing that show, how hard is it to get these people to be on your show? And I said, all you got to do is ask.
People love to talk about themselves. Yeah.
Hell yeah, absolutely. Here I am going on and on and on about whatever. But, in your position, I look at that and I start to think to myself, should I bring the edge of the unknown back? Because as much as I love telling the stories and narrating, and it's easier to do, and I don't have to run around and book people and be in a certain place at a certain time, I do miss that, I'm going to ask questions. That's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to let this guy or this lady or whoever it may be run and tell the story. So, and then I remember all the other obligations that I have in life. And I'm like going, yeah, I don't know if I can actually pull that off again. But after a conversation like this, I'm like, damn, I want to start doing it tomorrow.
I'll get off this call in, 10 minutes, half an hour, however long we have left. And I'll just be buzzing for days.
Right. I will probably do an episode of Uncle Josh with the stuff that I've got, just because, as you and I know, we were a little later starting tonight, and I'm home sans family, and I'm like, I got nothing better to do. Take the dog for a walk, and what the hell, maybe tell some scary stories, throw an episode together and pop it out there, because that's the hardest thing about doing the show when I was on WECK from 9 to midnight. And then when I was doing it on, internet radio from 8 to 10 was you get that vibe going, and it's now 2 a.m. and you're still amped up from what just happened. You can't sleep. You're full of energy. And I got to be honest with you, that's the way I feel right now. I'm like, yeah, I got to go do something productive because I'm full of energy right now.
And you just see the world through a whole new mindset of just anything's possible. What is really out there? How much more of this feeling can I find in other people's stories?
Yeah, that's why I love the fact, we talked right at the beginning about getting a story from Sweden, or getting a story from, that was Nadja's story. That's right. At first I had to, it didn't click into my head who that, where Sweden was, or Switzerland, it wasn't Sweden. Getting a story from, Switzerland, or getting permission to do that. Getting the stories that people send me from Australia, or the Renee up north, who I just did that story about his river trip, who's sent me lots of stories over the years. It's that cool feeling of, yeah, I heard your show. I remember talking to a Wiccan from a town outside of Vancouver, and she didn't even tell me. When I asked her to come on the show, she said, yeah, sure. And then throughout our conversation, she's like, oh yeah, we listen to you up here all the time. And I had no idea people were listening to my show. And it's kind of a neat thing. And it is, a little bit of an ego boost. You're like, holy cow, people are actually listening to this. I met a total stranger at an event, and we got talking about the podcast. And he was like, oh my God, I listened to you. And he just started laughing. He's like, now I read. He's like, I've been sitting here talking to you for a half hour. He's like, where have I heard this voice? And it dawned on me, he grabs his iPhone and he was like, there you are. And I was like, holy crap, look at this. Some total stranger, had no idea. But, again, like minds, people who are interested in this will find it. And it goes back to what I was saying with people trying to start something out. Don't be discouraged if you get 2 likes or only 80 people listened. That's 80 people that were listening to you and not something else, man. Because there's a whole lot of things that other people can be listening to. And when you start to think, it's hard enough to get one person's attention in this world. And if you've got 100 people checking out what you're doing, that's mission accomplished, man. It's not something to get frustrated with. It's not, I don't have 1.3 million views or whatever. All that will come if you believe in what you're doing. Like, don't just stop. The average lifespan of a podcast is, I think it's between 5 and 10, where people either lose interest in doing it or they're so discouraged with the results. You see that more in the corporate world than I think in anything else. People who are doing it for entertainment purposes or just their own passion usually last a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But when you look at that overall, if you've got 15 episodes and you're still going, you are so far ahead of anybody else who's tried it. And you might not even know it. Because again, people just get so discouraged or they're bummed. Don't. You get better. Your voice changes. The way that you're telling the story changes. The way that you get into a groove of how you're going to narrate or ask questions, whatever it may be.
Not to get too pretentious with it, but I do consider this like my art. It's
Right.
something I can constantly improve upon and continue down this path. You're about to be episode 30, which is really fun for me.
Holy God, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm more than honored to do this. And
just
to
having
hear
that labor
yeah.
of love, that project of passion to continue working on is its own reward in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. I'd love the show to get much, much bigger just so I could do more of it. But
it's amazing that, some of the content that's out there, because there was one guy who stopped, and I believe they moved all his stuff off of YouTube, but you can hear it someplace else. It was a guy called Phantom Librarian. Loved his style. Loved the way he read. He always had this cool little sound effect of when he finished the story, you heard the sound of pages of a book turning. And at the end, it was the sound of a chair kind of creaking back, like he was done, and you heard the book close. All those little
That's
nuances.
Brilliant.
I made him, he was so good. And I believe he had some health problems and just stopped doing it. But you can catch him on other things. And in my opinion, never got as big as he could have or should have been. And then there's other folks who have massive success and massive popularity that I only listen to because it's so bad, it's good. It's like watching Mystery Science Theater, right? With the commentary in my head, where it's listening to this and just going, how the hell does this guy have 1 million followers when in another realm or whatever, this would never have happened unless YouTube was there. And I'm not going to say the guy's name, but I think everybody would know who I'm talking about. He's got a very funny voice. His cadence is he pauses and he elongates words when he shouldn't. He mispronounces stuff all over the place. And it's just, I love listening to it because it makes him so cool in his own right. His goofiness, he's not going to stop being that guy. And that's why I love listening to him. And I know it sounds like I'm making fun of him. I'm not. But I listen to it because it is so offbeat and it's so different that I can't not listen to him. But at the same time, I'm like coming from the broadcast world, that guy never would have gotten a sniff to get on the air. There's no way in hell. But here he is, and he's got an empire.
Yeah. I think I have an idea of who it is, but I don't want to say.
No, yeah.
If it is the same person, I'm a huge fan as well. But that is the fun thing about life after a certain point, is that it becomes the more niche and interesting and off the beaten path people or content that becomes really, really fun and precious to you. There's a really, really good show called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place on Amazon Prime. And it's essentially like a hackneyed Stephen King tried to make a limited series. And they're going over the episodes of the show. And this guy he thinks he's God. He thinks he's like the kitty's pajamas. I can't believe I just used that expression. But it's so precious and goofy that I can't imagine not having that exist. It's just such an amazing show. Comedic brilliance.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I would say, especially, and now I'm getting into this, hey, like I'm some friggin' expert over here. Never let jealousy or frustration of someone else being successful and you're not ever, ever, ever enter your mind. because you're not that voice. You're not that person. You are your own thing. And again, it's about that persistence and that perseverance and that I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep doing this. You decide not to, hey, that's cool with the gang too. Just don't take your stuff down. Leave it up because there's people who probably do enjoy it. But, in the paranormal world, more so than scary stories or the things that I talk about now, there is a lot of that ill will and frustration and pettiness that allows to seep in. And it's funny, I mentioned my friend Mason Winfield. That was the first thing that he told me when I started The Edge of the Unknown. He said, don't get caught up in personalities. Don't allow yourself to get frustrated with people who don't like you. Don't get frustrated with people who disagree with you. Don't allow yourself to get mixed into the pettiness that comes out in the world, more specific to ghost hunting and that side of things, because there's a ton of it. Some of those people literally hate each other and would go out of their way to screw each other over. And it's really kind of sad. But I don't see that with narrators, but I can see people, especially if they're pulling stories from Reddit or wherever, getting angry with somebody else that read the same story. I mean, guys, it's public knowledge. Don't worry about that. Find a way to make it yours. Some of the stories that I've read, people will be like, oh, I heard that Phantom of Darkness did it. So what? Or, one of the guys that I dig, who's actually been on my podcast and I've been on his, Swamp Dweller. He might read the same story, but he's going to read it in a different way. And he wouldn't call me up and say, hey, I read that one. And, I would never do that to them. I mean, I love when I get submissions that I would rather have than narrating other stories that I found here or there, because a lot of times that is the exclusive. And other people will say, hey, I did send this to someone else and you don't have to read it. And I'm like, no, I'm going to read it. I don't care if somebody else did. Don't get caught up in pettiness. Don't get caught up in any of the nonsense that's so easy to fall into and in a million different aspects of life. Don't do it. All it's going to do is make you not want to do what you're doing. Something that you really like to do will become something that you hate. That's no way to be.
The way I look at my show specifically is that if I can't be a fan of it, then I'm not doing it right. And usually that is who I'm making the show for, is me. I think it was Rick Rubin who said, don't take the audience under consideration too much, because you're the primary audience. And then when you put it out into the world, then it can be something consumed by other people. But you want to make yourself happy first. Yep.
One of my favorite bands growing up was Black Flag. And I was, a huge Rollins fan.
He's a beast.
I had the pleasure.
I love Rollins.
Totally. Had a pleasure of meeting him on one of his spoken word tours. And I love when he did his last album and his last tour, he says he woke up one morning, he said, the words were gone. I don't have anything else to say. And I would rather someone have that kind of revelation to just say, I'm not going to do this anymore because I don't want to. I don't have anything else to add. I don't have anything else to say, rather than someone quit because they're frustrated that things aren't going the way that they wanted them to.
And that's important too, because that's a cohesive artistic end, is when you realize you have nothing left to offer. But to conjure another person from the rap sphere, I think of my show as for the children. To quote Old Dirty Bastard, he said, Wu-Tang Clan is for the children. I feel the same way about my show. I'm doing this so someone else can see someone doing something they love and are passionate about, and maybe they'll do that for themselves at some point.
I actually saw a young kid, I think he's 12. He's this little British kid who has started a music podcast. And probably why I thought of Rollins, because I was thinking of this kid. And he's interviewing guys like Rollins. He's 12. And I'm like, I look back and here, when I was 8, there I am in my room playing with my stuffed animals, doing the fake radio show, and thinking back and saying, boy, if I had this when I was 10 and I could do this like this kid is doing, I would love to hear more kids narrate. Might not be everybody's bag and it might not be the right, voice or whatever, but I would rather hear somebody trying than somebody sitting around wishing that they had. Don't lose that goal. Don't lose that drive. I can't wait to promote the hell out of, now that I've got a better idea and I've listened to your other episodes. That's one thing that I lack in is serving the community to say, hey, check out this guy's podcast. Check out this guy's podcast. I think it's partially because I don't listen to podcasts as much as I used to. I try to. But when I found out about yours, I'm like, we need more of this. I need more of this show.
Thank you, by the way. A lot of the people I've had on the show are creators in their own right. Some of them are comedians, other times. My buddy Justin Snyder, he's a amateur filmmaker. He's made a couple of indie horror movies. So whenever I do have somebody on an episode, I'll be the first person trying to push their stuff out into the world, you know? It's important.
Yeah.
You have to propagate cool stuff while you make cool stuff.
When you mentioned it's an art, and that's the way you approach it, artists need to take care of artists. That's all there is to it.
You got to pay it forward.
100%. Damn straight. For every person who sends me in something, I am more grateful than they will ever know because they make the podcast. It's not me. These aren't my stories. I didn't write this stuff. And there's just nothing better than I can do than to help somebody else out wherever I can. Yeah, and I think, honestly, the only people I've ever, and not even in a podcast format, but just on social media that, I don't know why it happens, but it's always the same group of people. The Bigfoot people always get so pissed off at me. And, and I love, reading their stories. And a good buddy of mine is, if anybody's ever looking for Bigfoot content, his name is Steve Culls. He's from Central New York. He's the Squatch Detective. He's been on all the big shows. You would love talking to Steve. He's got amazing stories. And I know most of your stuff is paranormal, but he's a great, great guy. For some reason, he and I get along very well. He was on the network that I actually started long before I was doing this. I actually had my own radio network for a little bit. But for some reason, I don't know what it is with Bigfoot. Those people are so sensitive. Ghost people tend to say, yeah, well, you don't know, and then leave it at that. I don't know what it is with the Bigfoot community. They get so angry when you're like, yeah, that didn't happen. That's not what you saw. You saw a black bear. No. And suddenly I'm banned from all these Facebook pages and nobody likes Uncle Josh anymore.
Well, I guess it feels more tangible to people in a certain way. There's a big lineage of pursuing Bigfoot. Even Rogan had his own show about it.
And honestly, I will listen to the episodes with Duncan Trussell when he was doing that Joe Rogan Questions Everything.
Yeah.
The podcasts that he and Duncan Trussell did talking about those episodes, guys, if you're listening to this and you haven't heard them, go to Spotify. They're harder to find because they're not listed as Joe Rogan shows. If you just search JRQE, there's only 5 or 6 of them. Listen to the first one. Duncan Trussell is on fire in that. It'll give you more insight as to what Joe was doing with that show. And most of the people he has on are also really good sports when you question them and say, well, you know what, is it really possible that this happened? It's usually the bigger guys, the Jeff Meldrums and those folks that take it in stride. It's the regular rank and file like me that just gets so pissed off. But oh well. Anyway, I'm beating a dead horse with that. But I want Bigfoot to exist so bad. I love when I get Bigfoot stories.
And that's another thing. You can never exactly disprove him. If Bigfoot's extra dimensional, hey, he might not be in this galaxy, you know?
Who knows? I don't care. I want him to exist so damn bad. More than ghosts, more than anything else. I love the idea of this giant creature wandering around in the woods that nobody seems to get a beat on, even with the technology that we have. It's just so much fun to talk about. And so if anybody is listening to this and you got a Bigfoot story, share it at this place first, this podcast, number 1. But if you got time, send it over to my podcast because I love Bigfoot stories, man. They're just so much fun to read.
Yeah, reach out to me. I'll get my boy Justin. He's our one Bigfoot episode so far, and we'll geek out over it.
Hot damn.
Oof, I love a good like Skinwalker Ranch episode where somebody just comes on who was maybe close to it, a ranch hand or something that was there. Oh, that would be lit.
Keep podcasting. Keeps you young. Keep talking to people. Keeps you young. But most importantly, it's the passion, it's the chase, and the thrill of that art that rejuvenates you. It will fill you with energy, and it's all positive stuff. So
Absolutely.
Again, I'm super honored to do this with you, man. I was so excited when you said, hey, let's just wrap and we'll talk about some stuff. It's one of those things. Right now, I'm totally revved up.
I got to tell you, the honor is all mine. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yep,
Scary Uncle Josh,
fun,
everybody.
Man. All right, man. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, take it easy. Have a good night.
You too, man. Bye-bye.
Now those were some frightfully fun stories. Howdy everybody, it's me, your host Danny, and I wanted to let you in on something special. You might have noticed that when I introduce the show, I say we are the Hometown Horrors podcast. That's because there will always be at least 3 people in each episode. Me, the person who wants to hear a good story, the guest, the teller of a good story, and you, the listener, that takes that story and carries it with you out into the world. And we make up a special kind of trinity. We are the Hometown Horrors podcast. And if you ever want to graduate from listener to guest, reach out to us via our handle on Instagram, hometown_horrors_podcast. Our email is thehometownhorrorspodcast, no spaces, @gmail.com, or via text or phone call at 571-358-8880, which FYI is not my personal number, but give it a ring. I'll get back to you, because if there's anything I've learned from doing the podcast is that everybody has a story, and that story deserves to be heard. On your number one source for the most spine-tingling, gut-wrenching, insomnia-inducing stories around, the Hometown Horrors Podcast.